and welcome everybody to a brand new month of book club here on Crushing Comics. I'm here with my co-host from around the world, Fangirl. How are you doing today, Fangirl?
Doing good. How about yourself?
I am super excited for this because it has been like 5 years since I read this Jonathan Hickman run, and a lot of life has happened, a lot of Marvel movies have happened, and I'm really excited to be rereading it now and seeing it with a new perspective. What about you?
Well, this was my first time reading, reading this run. As a matter of fact, this is actually, I think, my first Avengers,
Whoa.
Avengers book I read. Because I read like all of their the different events, the Civil War, your Avengers Disassembled, and all of that, Avengers versus X-Men. But I don't think I ever read just an Avenger title by itself.
So you've never read the Bendis years of Avengers on its own, just in the events?
I think I read the first trade. I vaguely remember reading the first trade. So, and that was I think back in 2012, 2013, so a long time ago. But, you ask me what happened in that, I'll be like, Avengers were there? There was Iron Man, Captain America, Thor may have showed up, but I have no recollection of it. So yeah, I was looking at it completely brand new, just looking at a completely brand new perspective.
This time around, we're going to attack book club just a little bit differently than we did in Batwoman and in previous months. We're actually going to, rather than discuss the story linearly, we're going to have some discussion questions to guide us and to guide you, and hopefully that you will respond to in the comments. That's partially because Jonathan Hickman's run, it's so back and forth, it's between Avengers and New Avengers, so much happens so quickly that it's not quite as easy to just go issue by issue the way we were with Batwoman. And my first question here is a big one, and it actually dictates a lot of the run, which is, what do we think of this idea of an Avengers world? Because we're coming off a long period of Avengers not being that big. Bendis made New Avengers a much more street level team. And even in the heroic age in 2010 with characters like Thor back on the team, they were really dealing with universal threats. They were very much rooted on the earth. And so now we're seeing the Avengers turn into this team that should be able to deal with any level of threat anywhere in the universe. And it's got to be a much bigger team as a result, with a lot of non-traditional Avengers on the team. So I know you don't have a grounding in what traditional Avengers even is or means, but what did you think of this idea of the team being so much bigger?
I loved it because the thing is, to me, I always think that when it's like a team up movie, let it be, whether it's a Justice League or Avengers, that it should be universal, like galaxy expanding, earth shattering events that's happening, and they should be able to deal with it, because there is no reason for Thor, Captain America, Iron Man to get together in order to get rid of Red Skull. They're much more powerful for that. So for them, they should be taken care of, analyze, or I don't know, I'm not probably saying that properly, but all the Kree, coming to take over, or Thanos even. So to me, that's it was perfect for that reason. And the thing is, I really loved it. I know that you want to drive with questions, but the first couple of issues when they're getting together, the team,
and putting it together. The big part of this question is that it's rare that we've seen such a widely cast net of New Avengers. Usually when they hand out cards, it's very specific, okay, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch join the Avengers, and it's a big deal. And to get them looping in so many characters, some of whom have never been Avengers before, is a really big deal. It's part of what makes these issues so much fun, I think.
Right. And the thing is, it kind of reminded me a little bit like Ocean's 11 when they were going.
Does.
Yeah, when they're going around and then kind of gathering all this super cool characters who are just so sure of themselves, so confident in their abilities and stuff like that. And they're each enticing them with a different motivation. I thought that it was one of the the coolest thing I've ever read, or especially for an Avengers comic.
Do you think there's anybody who shouldn't be an Avenger? At this point that the call has gone out so wide, clearly Tony and Cap have a specific idea of who they need and for what reason. But is any hero an Avenger at this point?
Sorry, I didn't quite understood the question. You mean that if there's someone who shouldn't have been there?
No, I mean, like at the point that the Avengers are this big, and the net, with Cannonball and Sunspot and a random new version of Smasher as
Right.
Avengers, is there anybody who shouldn't be an Avenger? Like, can Kitty Pryde be an Avenger? I'm trying to think of like other random characters. Is the Human Torch an Avenger? Like, is this just kind of who's on call right now? And in reality, all of the heroes on Earth more or less can be tapped as Avengers. Is Dazzler an Avenger?
I think so. I mean, I kind of like that idea of that, there is a core team where people can just kind of rolling coming around whenever who is available kind of thing. Because I think, like, I'm sorry to make the comparison with Justice League so much because, I have more DC background. But the thing is, like, they kind of have the similar thing where people just come and go and then they pair up and then they go on their adventures and things like that. So to me, I don't mind that. Like, before I kind of read all the comics or anything, I thought that's what the whole plan was, that all the superheroes were either in the part of the Avengers group. So to me, it's not a it's not a new idea or that someone who shouldn't be there. I was actually kind of hoping that there was more Scarlet Witch and Vision.
Yeah, they're not really around in this part because Scarlet Witch is in Uncanny Avengers at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And Vision, where I can't remember where Vision is.
He's in Tom King's Vision? Isn't that
that's
the
much
same
later than this. First, he's got to be in Avengers AI, but that doesn't happen until after this. I can't think of where he is at this very moment. He might still be off the table. I'd have to go look at my notes on my upcoming Vision guide. But, I think the comparisons to Justice League are apt. I think you have to think of the context of this. This run, was being planned as the Avengers movie came out. And I think that it was smart of Marvel and Jonathan Hickman to advance the Avengers to this Justice League level. Because I know very little DC. I have not read a lot of Justice League outside of New 52, but I get the sense that the Justice League will bring in whoever they need to bring in at any given time.
If you follow the animated series, or like, even in the comic, it's pretty much like, they have the core team, pretty much like, you have your Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and they have their core team of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and then everyone else is just a revolving door. They come and go, like based on whatever the situation needs, actually. So it's a more like flexible in that way.
I will also say though that I know that everybody was so excited at the time by this diagram. I remember being on this comic book resources boards when this diagram first came out and trying to think of like who's going to fill it in, and then symbols were being revealed without the names being revealed online, and people were losing it trying to figure out who all the Avengers would be. But then with like some retrospect looking back, I kind of feel like Hickman put a couple of people on the team that he didn't really care about, like Spider-Man and Wolverine, because he barely even touches Spider-Man and Wolverine, at least in this initial run. He gets a couple of good funny moments with Spider-Man, who very suddenly between issues 1 and 3 and then issues 4 through 6 becomes superior Spider-Man. So he goes from being like nice Peter Parker to mean Peter Parker. But I just feel like there were like a couple of mandated heroes that he had to carry over, and he's way more interested in some of these new ones that he brought in, I think, than some of the like mandated required. He doesn't really do a lot with Hawkeye. Like he definitely has his ones that he's more interested in.
Right, and the thing is, I feel the same way too. Especially like halfway through the Infinity, I already like we're gonna talk about it next week. But I already started thinking like, wait, where did Wolverine go? So yeah, there's certainly a little bit of that, and I think like they get taken out for other events that's happening at the same time and things like that. So it's one of those like the whole saga of like tie-ins and line-wide events, that's kind of sort of things that happens.
I want to now shift our attention from that main Avengers run, that starts out with this is an Avengers world, to the first 3 issues of New Avengers, which New Avengers floored me at the time and even today. I really think Hickman agreed to write Avengers because he wanted to write New Avengers. It seems like a story he was desperate to tell. And I think New Avengers matches up much better with his indie work, like Manhattan Projects. It's just much more about like a bunch of people in the room making the decisions. And gosh, there's so much to talk about in these first 3 issues. I guess my big question as an X-Men fan is, do we feel like Beast was the right replacement in this mix of characters for Xavier in terms of it's the Illuminati, Ben just put them together. They're kind of the all-controlling, most major characters from each franchise. And I love Beast. He's on the shelf right behind me here. But I do not feel as though he was a big league enough character to be on the Illuminati with these other characters.
So who would you have put instead? Because I don't know much about X-Men beyond the movies. So I can't, to me, it seemed natural. But, who would you put?
Well, I think it's natural in that he's like one of these super smart characters, but the Illuminati was never defined as having to be the biggest geniuses. And that's like, Beast has never really been a leader of the team. And so it's kind of like, well, I feel like he's just there because he's a genius, but also because he's morally flexible, which is a pretty big factor. So when I think about morally flexible X-Men characters, I think immediately of Magneto and Emma Frost, who were both in Uncanny X-Men, but both of them would have added something very interesting. Magneto would have brought back hints of that Black Panther run of kind of all of these heads of state. And I think Emma Frost would have played really interestingly against Black Swan, as and kind of breaking up the boys club of this group. I don't think you could use Storm, because I don't think Storm would ever agree to do any of the things that they agreed to do in New Avengers.
Right. And that's something, like, you bring up a good point about the sausage festiness of it all. Like, I was looking at the thing, I'm like, wait, usually, like, there's always going to be a female character.
The Smurfette.
There's always the Smurfette. I'm like, wait a minute. But then I started thinking that maybe the Black Swan would be the one that they will somehow get into, or like she will be revealed as someone, like, someone else from the other world. I don't know. I haven't read that part yet.
In my head, I was like, who is she? Like, so rarely does Marvel play this alternate dimension game without there being a punch at the end. So I'm like, is she Susan Storm? Is she Emma Frost? Is she, like, who is she from some other world? And I feel like there's moments where they hint in some of her interactions with them, but it's like a very little tickler here. I don't think that's meant to be something we're really focused on.
Right. So and that's why I was kind of hoping for that. But the thing is, like, I would go on record saying I do not like Illuminati. I do not like them. I didn't like them in Planet Hulk for what they did to Bruce Banner and Hulk. And I didn't like it here either. And you know why. Like, we talked about it. But the thing is, like, some of the questionable decision they made at the very early on, I was like, nope.
Well, let's really dig into this. So first of all, I want to make clear that my objection to them is not that they're all dudes. I just think that Beast, I think if the story calls for that, fine. I just don't know that I think Beast ever really, like, brings something. Like, every time he talks or every time there's a scene with him, I'm like, really? This is what we got? Because he's just not as indelible as a character as the other 5 of them. So that's my pitch around that. But let's talk about some of these things that made you go, ooh. I assume them brainwashing Captain America has to be on your list of, like, don't play that, because I know that you have some strong feelings about Captain America.
Right. So, I mean, not just, like, my feelings for Captain America, and that intensified at the end of this, up to Infinity that I've read. But it's more like, it's just like, I don't know. It's one of those, like, fake outs kind of thing. Like, they totally I was telling my friend, I'm like, they just totally identity crisis him. The identity crisis, like, the infamous DC run. It's like, I'm like, I don't know. Like, then again, I don't know what else they could have done to get rid of him, because I don't think Cap is someone who would just walk away and forget about it. Like, walk away in a huff and forget about it. So I understand that why they did that, but I don't know. Like, I feel like they always do this. Like, first when I say they always do this, my 2 interaction with them, first they got rid of Banner, and then, or Hulk. Now they got rid of another problem. They just put them under the rug or just push them away. It's kind of, I don't know. It's just, I quite didn't like that.
Well, I was intrigued by it. I don't know if I liked it or didn't like it, because from my position, it's like, well, Cap is not going to go along with, and we'll get into the incursions in a moment, right? But Cap is not going to go along with some of the human math of the things that they need to even consider, let alone do.
Right.
So that's going to be an impediment to them. But I also think about this idea of, does a real leader need to have plausible deniability, because they need Cap to be the leader of the Avengers. Tony Stark has really stepped back, even though he's pretending to collaborate with Cap in the Avengers run. And if you're only reading the Avengers run, it seems like they're collaborating as brothers. But then if you read New Avengers, you're like, oh, but really, this is a setup. Tony has given Cap this greater, bigger Avengers team to distract him, because Tony is busy with the Illuminati. So like, part of me feels like it feels like kind of any like president or leader who's a sort of a puppet in any kind of story, and that they needed Cap to be this figurehead and to have the plausible deniability of not knowing about the incursion, so he could just focus on what the Avengers needed to do. So in that way, like both in the story, in their actions, and outside of the story with Hickman, I kind of came to appreciate the choice. But the other thing that I really appreciated, and this goes towards Infinity, which we'll talk about next week, but it has to do with this run too, is all of these other planets in the Marvel Universe tend to be together as a planet. The Shi'ar, the Spartax, the Kree, and Earth is warring tribes, warring governments, warring species. And I feel as though that the Illuminati needed to be able to kind of like speak for Earth, and you can't be an idealist in order to do that. And Captain America is that. And so in order for them to like really speak for Earth in a way that they had to when they shot Hulk into space, they have to eliminate anybody who's going to put any one factor ahead of any other factor. It's got to be somebody who always speaks for the planet and doesn't really care about what the like net wins or losses are. And I think you really see that here with Namor and T'Challa, who both have these warring kingdoms, and left to their own devices, they would rip each other's throats out. But they're at this table speaking to each other because they have to. And I think that's what the Illuminati is. They're there because they have to be there.
And that's kind of like, I started to understand that a little bit more as the story progressed, like, that they are in the end decided to be necessary evil.
Yeah.
But for what I actually kind of got a little bit like, like, whoa, that this conversation's happening is that first, like Beast mentioning that, Captain America's telling them, oh no, we can't just sacrifice another Earth just because for ours. And then Beast says that, oh, are you telling another mutant what they are willing to do for the survival? Like, to me, like, and then the other, the other question of like, all this morality questions that, Cap was saying that you will convince yourself of anything if you keep on talking too much. Like, if you keep on discussing among yourself. So these are like some very heavy topic that they bring up, which I was like, whoa, like, I wasn't expecting that. Like, there wasn't a lot of slugfest. Like, they're killing, like, punching each other, but it was mostly like a lot of discussions that like, very mature discussions among, very powerful heroes, which I was like, I wasn't quite expecting.
Well, from there, I think talking about mature discussions, I'm looking for the page. I want to talk about the incursions themselves as a concept, because this is the driving concept of this entire run. Every story that happens inside of this run is less than the story of the incursions, no matter, and whether it's connected or not. So there's this idea that something has happened to cause one Earth to be destroyed. And that's fine, but it kind of reduces the overall fraction and tension of all of the universes and all of the Earths that are arrayed. And as it gets reduced, all of the Earths get closer together. So now there's this effect of like one of those infinitely moving, ball games where like an Earth gets close and they have to explode, and then things shrink, and then two Earths somewhere else gets closer and they have to, implode. And ultimately the only way to stop this is to remove all of the Earths, because even if you just remove one Earth, the motion is still going to keep happening. So to keep the universes more spread apart, ultimately all of the Earths need to be destroyed. Yet the Illuminati still have a kernel of good in their necessary evil, because they somehow think they're going to be able to stop this. Not only stop our Earth from exploding, but ultimately stop this process, which seems impossible.
I read that page where Reed Richards is kind of explaining explaining the situation probably like 4 times before it got into my head. But then I actually asked my friend, I'm like, so is this what it is that's going on? But the thing is, though, it's like as like, it's once again, it was one of those like, whoa, like what's gonna happen. But at the same time, I was thinking that whether it's an allegory of like Marvel editors kind of figuring things out, what to do with all their different arts that they have, and that they were kind of like reconciling it with their readers. So I was kind of laughing a little bit about that as well.
And so we very quickly get them faced with the decision. They have the first incursion, and Black Swan is there, and she's like, I took care of it already. And then they have a second incursion where Galactus is in the process of destroying this other Earth.
Right.
And that's the one I want to talk about for a second. They ultimately let Galactus go through with it. He kills, however many people would be on Earth, 7 billion people. And they're okay with that. Like, so how do you ever come back and be a hero as Reed Richards, as Tony Stark, having the blood of 7 billion people on your hands? Does it not count because they're from another universe? It goes by so quickly because that's not really the focus of that particular encounter. They're busy fighting Terax and all this stuff. But it always has stuck with me that from that point forward, they're all genocidal mass murderers, and they can't ever really take it back.
Yeah, but then that kind of goes back to your point of what you said, like they need to exist. Someone needs to be like, they can't be idealist, and they need to exist to speak for Earth. And that's what they decided to do. Because because the thing is, like, I think it would be more criminal if they got rid of Cap, and then at that moment they're like, oh no, we need to save that other Earth, because in that case, wait, that's the other thing that guy was telling, and you brainwashed him, so that wouldn't have fly. But the thing is, like, I think it was in the second incident of incursion when Black Panther, like T'Challa, had the weapon in his hand, and he's like, and then they're like, what are you waiting for? He's like, oh, I'm just remembering the last time I was a human, like,
and that's to explode an unpopulated Earth. So they're not even dealing with the heavy stuff at that point.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I was like, wait. I thought this Earth, to me, I was thinking, I'm like, what, this Earth is like, come on. Like, but then I understand that.
Right, that's it's the weight of the decision. Now that he knows that he's willing to pull the trigger, that they're pretty much accepting that they're willing to blow up a populated Earth. Right. It's the dominoes falling.
Yeah, and that's where it culminates what Cap said before. Is like, if you talk amongst yourself enough, you are going to convince yourself of anything, of justify yourself anything. So yeah, and that to me, I was like, whoa, things are about to hit the fan.
Now I want to talk about two smaller topics here that'll bring us further into the arcs in both of these titles. So I want to talk for a second about invented languages. Hickman loves graphic design, and he loves inventing little cipher codes and languages. They're two of his big things across all of his titles. We get Black Swan is speaking words from another language that don't have any meaning in English. And then we get this builder code that the Ex Nihilo speaks, and also some of the progeny of his, I don't know, the evolution bombs that hit the Earth speak this code. What do you think about these kind of invented languages in comic books?
Well, my feelings about adding random things. That's like, now you want me to kind of really focus on something, but it's not necessarily needed. Like I've never been a fan of that. But the thing is, like, at least in the oversized hardcover, and I'm pretty sure in the issues as well, they add a page with the codes, like, kind of translated. And I tried kind of did a little bit of free time trying to see what that means, and it's pretty easy because they kind of say the same thing again and again. But I don't know. It's just one of those things. It's cute, but necessary? I think not.
I feel the same way. I feel like it's not as though it's like a movie where somebody is speaking in Spanish and the people who speak Spanish can get it. Like there's nobody who can get it unless they take the time with this tool. And so I think what an author is saying is like, do you want to have the experience of these characters who don't understand what the other people are saying, or do you want to have the full experience? and be omniscient. Like, they're giving the reader a choice. And I do appreciate that to a degree, because you're experiencing it very differently, like if you make the choice or not. But then I think if you're going to do that, there's got to be a point to the stuff that you're reading. And I think I did one, I was translating a few, and it's just like, she's saying, I'll burn the skin from your bones. I'm like, well, that didn't really give me a lot for the amount of effort that I put in. I think if you're going to ask that much of me as a reader to like do this cipher code, then you got to deepen the story. And I think like an example of that, not that I'm a fan, is Dupe in X-Men comics, who originated from Ecstatics. He also speaks in a coded language. There is a key, but he's like half of the conversation. If you go, and some of the other characters kind of understand him. So if you go and decode Dupe, you're like, oh, that's what this comic was about the whole time. But you don't have to. Whereas I feel like in here, Hickman went through all this trouble, and then if you decode it, nothing interesting is being said, which ultimately kind of pissed me off.
Right. I might as like he might as well, that guy, like, you know, Adam, the first prodigy, like he might as well have gone and said like, I am Adam. It would have the same exact effect on me then like, you know, then trying to say that, oh, the white event is coming or whatever it is that they were saying, because, you know, I did decoded that. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Like, you know, I don't know. It's like it's okay. It's fine.
The part of it I liked much better, though, was Black Swan, who's speaking in her own cipher code in a way, because she's using certain words that we don't know what the meanings of them are, but she's using them very specifically. And I will say that at least two of them come to mean something very specific later in the run that now, having read the whole thing, I already know what she's talking about. That is a different kind of a mystery, because there's no way for us to solve it other than to read the whole thing. But those are so much more, I'm getting so much more from that on a second read than I am from the builder code.
Right. And yeah, and the thing is, like, the fact that I didn't even realize that she was speaking in a different language. Like, I thought that the words that she was using are existing Marvel words, or like, you know, Hickman's is introducing them. So I didn't know that she was like, or the fact I was like, okay, she's kind of speaking her own language. But yeah, but the code things, that just kind of gets a different eye roll, I guess.
All right, so that was one smaller topic. Here's another. This actually might be a bigger topic than a smaller one. I feel as though Hickman refuses to write the team as people. In Avengers. In New Avengers, they have very distinct personalities and perspectives. But in Avengers, he's almost writing them interchangeably. Towards the end of this run, we get some moments with Hyperion, some moments with Captain Marvel, where they don't feel as interchangeable. But I can never decide if he's just so intent on the plot that he's not paying attention to the character voices, or if this is kind of part of his point. That, like, the Avengers are all just puzzle pieces, and when they're Avengers, it doesn't matter what their personal deal is as much as it does when they're in other titles.
I think it's the latter, because, and to be honest, I appreciated that, because
really,
yeah, because the thing is, like, well, then again, I'm speaking for someone who knows these characters. Like, I know Hyperion. Like, you know, I not a lot of people, you know, I actually have all the Supreme Max, like all the Hyperion.
You definitely know more about him than me then, because I was like, who? I had to remind myself from Squadron Supreme.
Yeah, Hyperion is like one of the, like, when I saw that, I'm like, wait, this has Hyperion in it?
Oh, you must have been, because I didn't tell you anything about that, so you must have been like really, really excited when you saw it.
However, the Hyperion that I know and love is from a different Earth than this one. Yeah. And that's when I was like, boo! But still, I know the concept, because Hyperion is pretty much that if Superman was, instead of landing into the Kent farmhouse, what if he landed into United States Army's hand, and they raised him to be a weapon? That's pretty much Hyperion's deal. So I knew these characters, and to me, I was like, yeah, I don't need to know a backstory. I don't need to know who they are, like, you know, their character moments and stuff. I want them to be ready and to be go, go, go from the beginning. So the fact that it was like that, I really appreciated that, to be honest.
That's a really interesting perspective on it. I think for me, as like a long-term Marvel reader, at points I'm like, but these people have relationships. Like, why aren't we getting the moments between them that we, you know, there's like some joking between Hawkeye and Spider-Woman. Right. But at the time, because you have to think, I was reading these as they were coming out, you know, because I bought every single Marvel Now book. I was total Marvel zombie in that period. Right. I was having frustration. Now on reread, having known all of the scope of what happens in all of these characters' solo series, it doesn't bother me that much. I'm like, this is the team up title. I don't need to.
And I am coming from it from the exact same point of view, because I've also read Hawkeye, I've also read Black Widow, Captain America, Hulk, like every single title from Marvel now, almost every single title from Marvel now, I have read it. So to me, I'm like, I know what their story is. And also, like, from the MCU or whatever, I'm like, I know what their story is. I know what their deal is. I need them to be in action. I need them to be a team from Go.
Yeah, and I think now, having appreciated that, I pick up on the smaller things that Hickman does to make sure he maps to what's happening in the other titles. Like he does have Spider-Man have a transition, so you can tell he's the superior Spider-Man.
Right.
He does address that Iron Man is off of Earth with the Guardians of the Galaxy right now because he's in a remote-controlled suit when he's on Earth. He addresses that Reed is off Earth with the Fantastic Four. Like, in reality, Hickman is actually juggling a lot of conceptual balls here in terms of what all of these characters are up to. Even at this point, Spider-Woman, I think, maybe has no, maybe not quite yet. Doesn't have her own title. That's later in Marvel now. But I actually am really impressed with it on reread because he's threading this into continuity at very specific places so you can understand how the stuff fits around it. And I think at the time, because I always say you don't know when something fits until you finish all of the arcs because you have to see what the end state is. At the time, it was really hard to appreciate that.
Right. And that's I don't know. Because I'm always a trade waiter, or I'll wait for the whole run to be finishing. But I don't know, like, for some reason, sometimes I have heard people say that some of the runs, when they were coming in singles, people are like, what is going on over here?
It was really hard to read this in singles. Right. I transitioned to singles after Infinity because Infinity got me so hype. And I remember just being like, what? Like, I didn't understand single issue at all.
Yeah, I was looking at it more as like, it's okay, I know these characters. Let's go, let's do this. As a matter of fact, like the one issue where they kind of slowed down and they were raising these children, it was touching. It was kind of like, a sweet moment. But I'm like, whatever, move on.
And I think that part of it is you have to understand at the time that we were coming off of Bendis writing Avengers, where all of the characters did was talk to each other, and there was like there was nothing else really ever happened. Right. So it was really jarring. But actually, the next thing I want to talk about is some of these individual issues. So we get a whole issue of Smasher, which I think was, I wanted to be adapted to a major motion picture. I think that issue was amazing. It reminded me of like movies like Contact or Arrival or Interstellar. Like, it really had that feeling for me. And then there's an issue for Captain Universe. And then ultimately Hyperion really kind of gets his issue with the zebra children. And so Hickman is making sure that we understand the characters that he's either invented or that he's brought in from outside. And even Cannonball and Sunspot, although I don't necessarily agree with the way that he always characterizes them as like total bros, I think he actually spends a lot of time with them because he assumes that like they're probably the least known of the known characters because they've always been like tertiary X-Men characters.
And that's another thing I wanted to kind of point out, that is like, even though he doesn't spend time with established characters like Captain America or Iron Man, he does spend time for you to get introduced to all these other characters that you may not have otherwise picked up, like especially Hyperion, and also I'm forgetting Smasher. Like I never read anything by Smasher.
Well, Smasher. So this Smasher is like a brand new character. But had you ever read anything with the Shi'ar Imperial Guard in it before?
I think New X-Men had a little bit of them, and that's pretty much my only exposure to them. So
that was so exciting for me because they were introduced originally in the Dark Phoenix saga, which to me is like the Bible of comic books. I have it in probably 8 formats, and they've grown to be more than X-Men characters. But for an X-Men fan, you actually know them really well from reading Chris Claremont X-Men, and the whole thing about like how there's farm teams of Imperial Guards, but for each type of Imperial Guard there's one master version of the Imperial Guard, and it was just so fun to see like a whole issue all about it and kind of like rebuilding this mythology and telling us this is the way that it works in current Marvel. I'm obsessed with that issue. I think it was well written. I think the Smasher story with her grandfather is really touching, but then I love the Imperial Guard stuff too.
Right. And the thing is, to me, that kind of introduced me as a new reader into the lore of it, because I was like, wait, who is this person? But yeah, and I also enjoyed the Shang-Chi and them going to somewhere, I don't remember where it was.
Were they in Madripoor? It was Madripoor or Hong Kong.
Right, Hong Kong or somewhere.
I love those issues. The Mike Deodato art is gorgeous. It's got like pretty much my 5 favorite characters from this Avengers team on a team up. I remember when they came up, I was like, because I love Captain Marvel, I love Spider-Woman, I loved Shang-Chi, and then I had Cannonball and Sunspot. I'm like, well, and Black Widow. So I'm like, there's nothing better. This is as good as Avengers gets for me.
Yeah, and that was kind of like a quiet moment, because in the whole thing there was like, oh, this white event coming, and it's like, that it's more like galaxies, that they're going to Mars, coming back from Mars, there's all these things happening, and then you have this one quiet moment where they just go there and then have a good time. Captain Marvel does some weird with stuff. Black Widow gets up to some stuff. Like it was, in the end, it was like a good, I thought it was like a good vacation, like a vacation that you can imagine Avengers to have.
And I think it's hard to talk about that too much now because you're not a whole lot farther, and I've read this all before, but part of my critique of this run as a whole has to do with the lack of vacation. Like, I think any big story sometimes needs down moments, and Hickman at the beginning, this was shipping twice a month. New Avengers was once a month, and Avengers was twice a month. So there was time every few arcs to take a couple of issues and have a down moment. And after Infinity, he was like a little overwhelmed, tired out, who knows, maybe he was bored of writing that many issues a month, and Avengers went once monthly after Infinity. And so we stopped having time for these down moments, which is where Avengers World came. And we'll talk about that not next week, but the following week as we come out of Infinity. But that's why I think I have so much affection for this initial run, because there's time. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have amazing character moments, but there's time for other kinds of adventures. And I think that part of that has to do with we're still dealing with these 6 Argent bombs that have been spread all around the world. Some of them have knocked out entire cities, right? Perth, huge cities. And some of them have just come down kind of in the middle of nowhere, and each of them has a different effect. So we start to see them coming together in the next sequence, but we get a little bit of the one in the Savage Land here with these zebra children. What did you think about this idea as they don't need food, they don't need water, they don't need air, they don't seem to procreate. They're an entirely closed, intelligent system, but they're organic, so they're not a robot. Like, is that, and they have intelligence. I kind of just spent a lot of time thinking, like, has Ex Nihilo really created the perfect organic life form? Is there, like, should we just let them take over the Earth? Are they just perfect?
Well, that's the thing, though. I don't think they have been around enough for me to actually come up with a comment on them, because I just got them, they were just introduced. That's one issue, and then I don't think they were brought back again.
No. But I just think conceptually, like, Hyperion or Thor makes this very interesting comment of, if you have no need for anything biologically, then what do you dream about? And that becomes kind of the theme of that issue. But I thought that was so interesting that, Ex Nihilo is kind of making these perfected evolution versions of what could happen on every planet. But has he made it so that the characters have lost the spark of humanity? Thor is like trying to encourage them, like, chase this rock because it's a rock and you should chase it. And I will deem one of you to be the winner if you come back. And they're like, oh, okay, we'll chase this rock. But this idea that they have to be kind of like externally motivated and like, isn't one of the things about humanity in the Marvel universe, that they have so much of a spark, so much motivation all on their own. I just thought it was like a really interesting little commentary about Ex Nihilo trying to make something better than human, but that lack humanity.
Right, and the thing is, like, this particular Ex Nihilo, compared to the
makeup, I don't know. He's right. I love him. He's so funny. He's got
He is actually, because the thing is that okay, let's put him on the side over there. He compared to the his brothers we later get introduced to in Infinity, he's actually different. I mean, he has a personality of his own. He can think for himself beyond what the Alephs and the Builders have taught him. I can't believe I actually remembers this.
Yeah, that was impressive, man. You like reeled them right out.
I know, and I think it's got to do with, I think something that's like, you know, it gets talked about because he still has his abyss, like his sisters with him,
right.
And I think
no
that drives
it. Unfortunately,
yeah,
she's cool. They're really cool character designs. This guy, he's solid gold. He has a third eye, and then he's got this Omega symbol on him, and then
the fact that
an amazing character design blows my mind.
And the fact that, you know, they just kind of mopped the whole floor with the Avengers and then sends one of them back. And it's like, oh, just tell the Earth that, you know, you've been judged and we found you wanting. I was like, whoa. But yeah, and the thing is like the fact that they later joined the Avengers. So it was kind of cool thing. But yeah, I think like it was pretty much that he was just bored and he was just practicing. Like that I took it as that.
I know he's got he's like almost comedic, even when he's fighting them and he's really deadly. I don't know if it's something about how big his mouth is on his face or the way that Hickman's writing him in the script, but he's very like lovable to me because he's not a real villain. He's got this goal that's similar to the goal of Mr. Sinister and the High Evolutionary before him, but I just can't bring myself to kind of like dislike him, even when he's in villain mode at the beginning now, because he's a very compelling bad guy. He doesn't want to have a fight. He's got a specific job to do. He made Mars green. Like, you know, he's on a mission, and don't get in his way or else he has the technology to stop you.
Right. And the thing is, like, I initially thought that he is going to be the big baddie of the whole run. But then I was very quickly, that idea was dispensed. But the thing is that, I think like, you know, he was just probably trying different things. Like maybe he saw the way humanity is, like, you know, by his interaction with Avengers. So he was like, well, let's try this other thing. Because I think that in his head, that's the ultimate goal, to be like, you know, you don't need anything. You're self-sustaining.
Right.
You know,
and in a way, it made me think like he's a mutant in a way. He wants to do something different. He's experimenting and he's evolved on his own. And I always love when Marvel does the mutant analog in different characters or different races where they're like, well, in a way, he's a mutant of his race because he's diverged from the way that other people in his race are doing things. And that to me is interesting. And I love when when they tell him you got to stay on Mars, he's like, fine. And then they go to visit him on Mars later. And he's like, oh, now you're back.
Yeah. I was like, wait, did you just stay in Mars because these people told you to? Like, I was expecting
just so funny.
that.
He's like a little kid. He's like, all right, I'll stay in my room. It made me laugh so hard.
And so speaking of those zebra children, though, because I think like even though you were saying that they don't have much humanity, but the thing is they do actually have sparks, though. Like you know that you can teach them, because you know that how when Thor, like you bring up like Thor's like, oh, go chase that thing, like, or go on the top, because they were just like kind of sitting there and chilling while they were just, you know, even though it's supposed to be training day, but the thing is like you can see in the background while they were talking that one of them falls, the other one catches them, even though they were.
I love those panels. Right? They're beautiful panels. Right. Deodato. I stopped and stared at them.
Right. And the thing is like these things are happening in the background, and until that, you know, they got to the top and Thor is like, well, you are the worthy one because you saved that your sibling or whatever.
And then the other one gets angry in the background.
Right. So the thing is like, you know, I mean, if you look into that, like, I don't think they're completely without humanity. Like, I think they just need a little bit time. Like someone needs to teach them, like under wrong hand, they can turn into weapons.
But I think that ultimately, and the reason I brought this up, and I think our conversation has taken an interesting turn about them, is that they're almost like a metaphor for comic book heroes. Like they're these perfect characters. They don't eat, sleep, or breathe, but they're not anything unless you send an electrical charge to them, right? It's like a I don't know, you're the scientist of the two of us. Like something that you've got to send an electrical charge through to excite it and like make it active. Yeah, it's like they're like electrons. And without an electric charge, nothing is there. And and Hickman, in a way, I feel like is making a comment about like, there's all these perfect heroes and you think they're so great and you love them. But unless you insert some drama and some conflict in their life, like that one background zebra who's like, oh, it's supposed to be the winner. It doesn't matter. They're not compelling. And I keep coming back to that as I continue through this run, even though I originally felt like it didn't have a lot of personal moments, that Hickman is like saying like, these characters are only interesting if you make it life or death, if you give them a challenge. Like the status quo is fun, but ultimately it's empty calories. They don't need to eat, breathe, sleep, whatever. You can have them run in a circle and beat each other up as many times as you want to, but to get anywhere interesting, there needs to be stakes. And that's like the whole thesis of Hickman's run is I'm going to give you the biggest stakes that have ever happened at Marvel. Nobody's going to be able to top this in the history of Marvel.
Right. And but the thing is, like, at the same time, though, I think that's true for any protagonist of any medium. Like, what is a character if the character doesn't have a stake to
of course.
run
I think he's making like a meta commentary about comics in general. Like, do you really just want to see these characters stand around and pose? Like, he's saying to the fans, like, it's got to be more than that.
Right. By the way, before we move on from Avengers, though, I do have two, I know you are always the one who has top points, but there are 2 points.
Your questions. Your questions are great.
I have 2 points. Okay. How awesome. Okay, first of all, how awesome was it that Kevin's introduction or Brand Star?
Star Brand. Yeah.
Star Brand. Sorry. Like, how awesome would
that's
Star Brand. Shut up!
It's just funny. Now I'm thinking of who Brand Star would be. He would be like covered in corporate logos and he'd be like, I am the Brand Star. And that's my alley.
But anyway, the thing is, like, the fact that, I like, the way he was introduced, like, the fact that, they say that, oh, it's someone that, there's some machine. The whole idea is like, there is this machine who picks this people who are supposed to, that destroy the world when the time comes or, help them. And this machine is backfiring, it's lost control and now choosing people that they shouldn't. And one of the people they choose is someone you would never notice. And the thing is, before that, there's these panels happening where there's this people that are just going about doing their thing, and you're like, okay, what's the point of this
background of the panels?
Right?
Yeah.
No, because the thing is that you're like, okay, what's going on? I was thinking that having read so many comic book, like I was like, oh, there's gonna be some explosion, right? And then Avengers will be called to that. But it turns out it was this one character that you're supposed to be following, which you then have to go back to look into it, and you'd think that, oh my god, that character was there the whole time. I thought that was brilliant. Like, I don't have anything much to say. I thought that was brilliant.
Well, so I don't know if you, because you weren't a comic reader back in the 80s, and so I don't know if you understand where Starbrand
I wasn't around much of 80.
I don't know if you understand where Starbrand and Nightmask came from, but when this promo image came out, the cover of, I think it's Avengers #7, the fan community went insane because this bolt of lightning hitting Earth was very reminiscent of some of the art from Marvel's New Universe, which was at the point that Jim Shooter was an editor, they tried to launch a whole second line of Marvel that was in a much more realistic universe. It was kind of like their first take on doing something like Ultimate, except for they weren't going to do any of the Marvel heroes. They were just going to start this more grounded superhero universe with a much more distinct amount of heroes. And Starbrand was one of the major heroes from that universe. And Hickman kind of uses this as a way to say, like, Earth is going to evolve some of these heroes too. And then after the end of Secret Wars and with this kind of semi-rebooted Marvel Universe, even more of those New Universe characters are brought in and by Al Ewing in Ultimate. So it's just this Hickman genius. Like, there are so many deep cuts of Marvel history. And to bring back New Universe, which Marvel they had done New Universal by Warren Ellis, but they hadn't really done anything with it for so long. It just was one of these moments that was crazy. But here's the thing. You really appreciated the idea that the machinery is going to build these imperfect versions without knowing any of that. And I haven't read any of those comics. I just remember them. And I think that's like, again, Hickman is unmatched in this kind of stuff because he does these deep cuts, but then he does them in a way that even a newbie to that particular deep cut can still appreciate what he's doing.
Right, and I think it's like it didn't need it any more than what he presented, because I think it was perfectly fine for me, and especially the Adam, the other progeny that Ex Nihilo created, their interactions. I think that gave you a lot more. I don't think that was in this one. That was in Infinity. Never mind. I didn't say that.
Well, okay, you said you had 2 points. So one of them was about our friend Brandstar, and what was the other one?
Brandstar.
I'm never gonna
the other one was actually, this is something that I need your help with to understand. Did Avenger 1 came out before in New Avenger?
Okay, this is really interesting. New Avengers and Avengers launched at the same time in January of 2013. I remember, and I'll leave with an anecdote about this, Hickman doing a Q&A at the beginning of 2013 about these titles. But you have to remember that Avengers came out twice a month and New Avengers came out once a month. So it took 3 months to get to Cap being brainwashed in New Avengers. But in that time, the whole first 6 issues of Avengers was over. So like there was constant, it was interesting as a reader, but it added to that confusion of reading single issues or collections at the time, that like New Avengers had all the important plot information, and you were always kind of like waiting to catch back up with like what was happening behind the scenes in New Avengers, even though Avengers was like galloping forward, being released twice monthly.
Right. But the thing is, like, this is kind of the beauty of reading everything at once, you know, that having everything at once, because I was kind of blown away having to go back to this panel that is in the first Avengers, like, Avengers #1. And when I first read it, I'm like, huh?
Realizing the significance of the panel later when you realize that he seeded it in the first issue.
Right. Because I was like, is he dreaming of fantastic, like, is he having a nightmare that these people are about to do some weird things to him? Because they're looking rather sinister over there, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on over here? And then I kind of read New Avengers, and then it was actually one of my friends who kind of pointed out, oh, did you see it coming? And I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? Then I went back to look at it. I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. I just wanted to point that out.
Well, actually, and if you look at the opening pages of Avengers, and he repeats these words over and over through the run. It was the spark that started the fire, the legend that grew in the telling. And then he pulls out different moments. Hyperion being pulled into this earth, which he revisits later. When the guard were broken on the dead moon, we'll get to later. Ex Nihilo, we get in this run. But all of these moments are from way deeper in the run, like months, years deeper into the run. And he gives the whole game away in the first 2 pages of the comic book. And it's just, there's not a lot of writers at Marvel capable of that at that point, currently, ever. And so that's pretty impressive. Bendis is good at that kind of thing. As much as I talk smack on Bendis, he's one of the few other writers that can tease something years out of time.
Right. And the thing is, like, I already kind of, I did the completely backward thing of reading Secret Wars way before. I don't have.
You're going to understand it so much better now.
No, I know. Now I'm like, wait, what is going on now? But yeah, I'm going to understand it way much more. But I think this panel is from Secret Wars, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
I think it is, because I think Secret War has a very similar, similar vibe to it, because I was looking at it and I'm like, whoa. And yeah, and the thing is, honestly, that Hickman's, we didn't talk about enough about Hickman's writing. Like, we talked about his story plotting and stuff, but I really love that kind of kind of lyrical narration kind of thing. Like, it's just kind of, I don't know, I was like very touched by it. I don't know who this narrator is, or who is talking, but I was very like, it was very like, oh, someone is telling me a story, I'm sitting down to listen to it.
That's really interesting. And I think it's one of the things I love about him that I can forget. His Fantastic Four is so marvelous, and for that reason, that it's lyrical.
So marvelous, ding, ding, ding. You get a point.
I use that word a lot because Marvel's always on my mind. But then when you go to his individual comics, he's actually a great writer of prose. And I think people get so caught up with his crazy mystery boxes and his crazy graphic design circular symbols that he's obsessed with, that people lose sight that he's a spectacular writer. He writes powerful words.
And the other person that I have actually known that who can write this way is Alan Moore. Like, it's a completely different person. But the thing is, I think, especially his Saga of Swamp Thing, it's kind of like that. It's like very lyrical, very like, you're kind of lulled into a story mode kind of thing. So yeah, I really like that, especially when like Infinity, there was like so many times there's this moments that came at it came out. I was like, oh, love. I had heart eyes.
Well, let that be our tickler for the next episode, which is I, having reread Infinity, I am now ready to say I think this is the best event in the history of Marvel events. I don't know, you've read a lot of Marvel events. Would you say that?
No, I would say that's the best event of any event. Like,
Whoa!
I don't know. Well, then again, hang on. I didn't read
save the
Final Crisis
discussion for
yet.
next. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't read Final Crisis yet.
Okay.
But I can't tell. But the thing is, like, I'm like, because I don't know, this is something. Like,
Well,
I have a lot to say. But
yeah, we have so much to say.
Only just be careful that there is no stopping. You don't know where to stop. You just
unless you really know the difference between these artist styles, which gets tricky because some of them really are doing really similar work, and a lot of it's colored by Justin Potter, who's an expert.
That's the only way you'll know. Yeah, that's the only way you will know. And also, like, you're going to begin to figure out, like, certain players are available. But the thing is, you don't know when to stop. You're like, okay, I'm going to stop now to take a break.
No, it's hard to not read it in one sitting.
No, because you're like, okay, what's going to happen next? Oh my God, hurry up.
Well, that's where we're going to leave you. What's going to happen next? Please read Infinity. Even if you haven't read these issues, these 19 issues that we read, or 17 issues that we read today, it's fine. You could just read Infinity. We'll help you catch up with what you missed. And this video hopefully helped you catch up with what you missed. So tune in next week, and we're going to talk about Marvel's 2013 Jonathan Hickman event, Infinity. See you next time.